Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking a close look at some pretty intense legal proceedings. We're diving deep into source material covering recent court days in the trial involving Sean P. Diddy Combs.
That's right. The specific sources we're using today, they're excerpts from a YouTube transcript. It recaps day 13 and day 14 of the trial,
Okay.
and it focuses heavily on the testimony and then the cross-examination of Mr. Combs's former assistant. She's referred to as Mia in the source.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but it also, touches on other witnesses and some observations from inside the courtroom itself.
Gotcha. So our mission here really is to navigate this detailed account. We want to pull out the most important bits of information, the key insights, and try to understand what these moments might reveal about, well, the complexities of the case being presented.
Yeah, highlighting what Mia raised, but also critically how the defense pushed back on her account.
Exactly. Okay. Let's unpack this then. So, based on the source material, day 13 seems like it was all about Mia's direct testimony. What kind of picture did she paint for the jury?
It was, well, according to the source, it was pretty harrowing, actually. She described her time working for Mr. Combs as being filled with fear and chaos.
We're in chaos.
Yeah. She gave the jury sort of an inside look at what she says she went through in that environment.
And the source details some specific incidents she mentioned. Can you walk us through a couple of those key ones?
Absolutely. She testified about being caught right in the middle of this like explosive situation after Cassie, who's Miss Ventura, and the source allegedly found out Mr. Combs was cheating
Okay.
with someone named Gina. Apparently, after seeing a video, Mia said she was basically caught in the immediate fallout of that whole thing.
Wow. And she shared some really personal stuff too, didn't she? Like text messages?
Yes, the source notes she described these really disturbing texts about having night terrors, about Mr. Combs.
Night terrors.
Yeah, and she claimed he sent her what sounds like a threat via WhatsApp. The source quotes it as, "Let's go to war and I'll tell everything," if she didn't text him back.
That sounds incredibly high stakes
Ah.
and tense. And wasn't there something about a yacht mentioned too?
There was, yeah. According to the testimony recounted in the source, this incident happened on a yacht in St. Bart's in years 2010.
Okay.
Mia described Mr. Combs allegedly getting furious, really angry, because she was counting money in a safe too slowly for him.
Just counting money too slow.
She testified, yeah. These moments, as she presented them, were meant to illustrate this, volatile environment she says she was working in.
And beyond these specific events, the source also mentioned her testimony about the long-term impact, right? The
Yeah.
trauma.
She did. She spoke about lasting trauma, said she hasn't been able to go back to work, suffers from severe complex PTSD. Her direct testimony, as it's laid out in the source, it clearly supports the prosecution's whole narrative about alleged abuse and the trauma it caused.
Okay, so that sets the stage. But then, this is where the legal process really kicks in, isn't it? Because the source recap of day 14 shows the focus shifted completely.
Completely. It went to the defense's cross-examination of Mia, led by Mr. Combs's lawyer, Mr. Steele.
And what was the defense's main goal there? What were they trying to achieve?
Well, the strategy, as you'd expect in cross-examination, was really to challenge her credibility, to, poke holes in her story,
Right.
create doubt for the jury, and basically argue that she shouldn't be seen as a credible victim here.
And they did that, it seems, by using her own past words and actions against her. The source mentions social media posts.
Exactly. They showed posts where she'd called Mr. Combs a legend, said things like, "We effing love you."
Wow.
And they even presented a scrapbook she'd made for his 45th birthday. It had a note inside saying, "I love you forever."
So the defense is basically saying, look at this, how can you be terrified if you're writing things like, I love you forever?
Precisely. They used these examples to suggest her public image, or maybe even her private gestures, contradicted her testimony about being scared and miserable.
How did she respond to that? How did she explain those seemingly contradictory messages?
Her explanation, as the source recounts it, was that this was all part of a necessary facade, a front.
Facade.
Yeah. She said she didn't want her family and friends to know the misery she was in, and she also stated she was afraid he was going to unalive her. Regarding the scrapbook, the source notes she called it a lot more complicated than it looked. It really speaks to that complexity the defense is trying to highlight. Was it real affection, or was it an act driven purely by fear?
Right. The defense also brought up how she left her job, didn't they?
They did. They tried to introduce some evidence apparently related to alcohol use as the reason she was fired.
Okay.
But the judge, Judge Subramanian, according to the source, ruled at least one piece of that evidence couldn't be used, said he didn't want it used just to, quote, embarrass the witness.
And they also questioned her resume, claims she made there.
Yes, they challenged things she'd written about being good at multitasking, having thick skin, dealing with uncomfortable situations 204/7.
Suggesting that contradicts her testimony of being traumatized.
That seemed to be the angle, yeah. Like,
Yeah.
how could you claim to have thick skin but then be so deeply affected?
But maybe one of the most impactful lines of questioning, at least potentially for the jury, was about communication after she stopped working for him.
Oh, absolutely. This was a huge focus for the defense. They showed a whole bunch of text messages
Texts
showing she stayed in touch with Mr. Combs well after she left in March 2017. Things like a Merry Christmas text in 2018, reaching out after Kim Porter's funeral.
Okay.
Even a message in 2019 about a nightmare she had where Mr. Combs actually saved her from R. Kelly.
Saved her.
Wow. Yeah. And texts in 2020 about someone named Dre's audition, and even remembering funny moments together.
So, for the defense, the point there seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? They're arguing, look, how can someone be so traumatized, so terrified, if they're still sending Christmas texts and reminiscing years later?
Precisely. It's a direct hit against that narrative of debilitating trauma and, a complete break from the situation she described as abusive.
And Mia's response to that challenge, what was her explanation for those texts?
She gave several reasons. She talked about feeling like she was in a psychological grip, almost like being brainwashed by Puff, as she put it.
Brainwashed.
Yeah. She described the experience as having these extreme highs were really high and the lows were really low, that kind of dynamic.
Like a roller coaster?
Exactly. She also testified about internalizing blame and shame, feeling like she was punished whenever Puff was violent, making her believe she had done something wrong.
So taking the blame herself.
Right. And she mentioned being afraid he would tell Cassie something that allegedly happened between Mia and Combs. When they specifically asked her about that 2020 text, the one about remembering funny times, she said, according to the source, I would have never said that because it's not true, implying the text didn't reflect her actual feelings or reality at that time.
So her explanation is basically that the ongoing contact wasn't normal, but actually a symptom of the psychological damage from the relationship itself.
That's the core of her explanation, yes.
Yeah.
Not a sign of things being okay, but a sign of how deep the alleged control went.
The defense also tried using photos, right? Pictures of her social life.
They did. The source noted they showed pictures of Mia out with friends, with family over the years. The idea was to counter her testimony that she had, like no time away, no one to talk to outside that circle.
But the judge didn't allow those.
No, the judge excluded them, said they lacked relevance and were cumulative, meaning they'd kind of already made the point or it wasn't central enough.
Okay. And her relationship with Cassie Ventura, Ms. Ventura, that also came up during the cross-examination.
It did. Mia had described them as best friends, like sisters. But then she said she couldn't tell Cassie certain things because Mr. Combs allegedly wouldn't allow it. So she had to basically stick to whatever story he told her to tell. She also threw in these allegations about Mr. Combs stealing phones and putting tracking devices on Cassie's car.
So the defense was maybe probing that friendship, looking for inconsistencies there too.
Seems likely. Questioning how close they really were if she couldn't confide in her, perhaps.
And the defense makes sure to mention her past lawsuit against Mr. Combs.
Oh, yes. They highlighted that Mia had previously sued Mr. Combs, and it resulted in a $200,000 settlement through mediation.
The implication being?
Well, the defense might be trying to suggest a financial motive for her testimony now, planting that seed of doubt.
Right. There was even an attempt to bring in a specific photo, wasn't there? Something with a tutu.
Yeah, the defense tried to use this picture, Mia, in a tutu, Mr. Combs apparently holding his private parts nearby, and ask about it related to Miss Ventura's essay allegation.
But the judge shut that down.
Yep, prosecution objected and the judge sustained it. So that line of questioning didn't go anywhere.
Now, a really crucial part of the cross-examination, according to the source, focused on the timing. the timing of Mia's own essay allegation to the prosecutors.
This was clearly a major point for the defense team. They suggested she didn't actually make her essay allegation until June 2024.
June 2024?
Yeah, which was months after Ms. Ventura's lawsuit against Combs had become public knowledge.
And the defense is asking, why wait so long?
Exactly. Why did it take so long? The tactic aims to imply that maybe the allegation isn't genuine, or maybe it was influenced by seeing the other lawsuit gain traction.
How did Mia respond when they challenged her on that timing?
She said she didn't really remember the specific dates. She mentioned she had talked about it with her therapist, which is privileged communication,
Okay.
and that it happened sometime after she got legal representation. The defense tried using notes from earlier meetings with the government to pin down exact dates, but Mia basically said her memory wasn't specific enough for those particular dates.
They also questioned some of the specific incidents she described, right? Looked for proof.
Yes. They asked, were there any photos, any recordings of things like that alleged chase at Princess Party or the incident with Cassie on a paddle boat in a storm?
Implying maybe she made them up.
That was the clear implication. Mia denied making them up, but she did confirm there weren't any records like photos or recordings.
And they asked why she didn't react in certain ways.
Right. Why didn't you call the police? Why didn't you get medical help for an arm she claimed was hurt? She said she wasn't allowed to for the arm injury. Why didn't you take photos or screen during these alleged incidents? Her response was that she was basically in shock.
So the defense strategy here is essentially using the lack of, let's say, external proof and maybe the lack of what people expect a victim's reaction to be
That's
to
it.
cast doubt on whether the events happened as she described or how severe they were.
That's the core tactic, absolutely. Highlighting anything that doesn't fit this maybe overly simplistic common idea of how a victim should react or document abuse. They also questioned her ability to even explain the abuse she says she suffered, suggesting maybe she was actually comfortable with Mr. Combs most of the time, except when he was allegedly violent towards Cassie.
And there was even an attempt, the source says, to label her testimony in a pretty harsh way.
Yeah, the defense lawyer tried to suggest she'd joined a Me Too money grab.
Oof.
Big oof. But the judge sustained the prosecution's objection to that. Still, it shows how aggressive the defense was trying to be in challenging her motives.
Finally, the cross-examination apparently touched on a text message she sent back in 2017, right after she was fired.
That's right. The source notes she discussed unaliving herself in that message.
Yep.
The defense tried to spin that as proof she loved the job so much she was devastated to lose it. But Mia countered that. She said her entire world was being ripped away from her. She explained that at that moment, she didn't fully realize how awful that world actually was, looking back on it now.
So again, two completely different interpretations of the same message. Defense sees job attachment. She describes the collapse of her reality, even if toxic.
Exactly. It really captures that stark contrast.
All right, so after that incredibly intense cross-examination, the prosecution got another chance, right? Redirect. What points did they try to shore up?
They basically aimed to add context back to some of the points the defense made. The source mentions they confirmed, posting on social media was part of her job. She'd get yelled at if she didn't do it.
So the positive posts weren't necessarily voluntary expressions.
That was the argument. And that posting about the good times, not the bad times, was actually necessary for her safety. She felt safe when he was happy, and she knew his wrath if he wasn't.
Makes sense. What about her talking to the government and why she was testifying at all?
Yeah, the prosecution tried to clarify that meeting with the government was just so they could understand her story. They stressed the government only told her to tell her truth.
Okay.
They also tackled that potential contrast the defense might try to draw between her testifying about trauma and her background doing comedy. Mia apparently stated that doing comedy had Puff's permission. You couldn't even compare it to testifying about essay.
And her reason for being there, testifying now.
She said it was a moral obligation so she could look her goddaughters in the eye.
Wow. Powerful stuff. Now, beyond just the words spoken in testimony, the source gives us some interesting glimpses into the courtroom dynamics during these couple of days.
It does. There are notes about the judge, Judge Subramanian, really managing that cross-examination, warning Mr. Steele about being repetitive, for instance.
Okay.
The prosecution even complained at one point, said the cross had become humiliating harassment and was adding to the witness's trauma.
How did the judge respond to that?
He said he didn't see improper treatment right then, but he stated he would keep watching closely.
And observations of the people involved.
Yeah.
Combs, Mia.
Yeah, Mr. Combs' demeanor was described swiveling his head, propping his elbows on the table. Mia was often seen with her head down, bangs kind of covering her face.
And the jury? Any reaction noted?
This was interesting. The source specifically mentions one female juror was seen smiling and appearing skeptical during Mia's testimony under cross-examination. That's a rare peek into potential juror reaction.
That is interesting. Anything else from the courtroom atmosphere? Spectators?
Just brief notes. Mentioned spectators were present, including one person spotted with a not guilty wristband. Apparently, they flipped it inside out when asked about it.
And the source mentioned a comment from someone close to Mr. Combs, a friend.
Yeah, Charlucci Finney. Reportedly commented that Mr. Combs might actually testify himself because he has nothing to hide.
Really? Okay.
And Finney also talked about the emotional toll on Mr. Combs' children. They're there, in court, but can't really interact with him normally. And of course, they also recently lost their mother, Kim Porter. It just adds that layer of the personal impact, beyond the legal arguments.
Definitely. Okay, so moving beyond Mia's testimony, the source did cover at least one other witness during this period.
That's right. Sylvia Oken. She's the director of sales and marketing at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
And her testimony was about?
Pretty factual stuff, mostly. Details about the hotel's reservation system, how it links aliases to real names, confirming the connection to Mr. Combs. Payment details, too, showing Bad Boy paid with an Amex linked to Sean Combs.
Okay, so establishing presence and financial ties. Was there anything specific?
Yes, crucially, she confirmed details about a specific bill. For room 259, it included a $500 charge for oil damage. And she noted Cassie Ventura was the accompanying guest listed on that bill.
Ah, so that potentially corroborates details around events alleged to have happened at that hotel involving Miss Ventura.
Exactly. It provides that kind of external, factual anchor for parts of the narrative.
All right. And looking ahead, the source also gave a hint about who might be coming up next. Future witnesses.
It did mention several names being discussed. Eddie Garcia, he's security from the Intercontinental Hotel. Frank Piazza, a forensic video expert.
A video expert, okay.
Mr. Combs' own employee, Derek Ferguson. And other accusers, too, identified as Brianna Bangolan and someone called Jane, using a pseudonym.
There was something about timing for one of them.
Yeah, a quick note that Jane apparently has an international flight scheduled for next Thursday suggests the prosecution is likely planning to get her testimony in before she has to leave.
Okay, quite a lineup, potentially still to come. So when we step back and look at this deep dive into these two specific days, based on the source material, what does it all really tell us?
Well, I think it gives us a really, really detailed look at the kind of intense scrutiny a key witness faces, especially in a high-profile trial like this one. It just lays bare the defense's strategy, doesn't it? Challenging credibility by grabbing onto any potential inconsistency, past statements, actions, even how someone talks about their own trauma.
It really highlights the sheer complexity of presenting incredibly personal, often painful testimony in a formal legal setting. It's not just tell us what happened.
No, not at all. It's about whether that story can survive this deliberate, targeted attempt to pick it apart, often using the witness's own history against them.
Exactly. The source material really shows how that legal process can almost weaponize someone's past, forcing them to justify things they said or did years ago, now viewed through this lens of alleged fear or psychological manipulation. And this brings up, I think, a really important question for anyone following cases like this. When we hear these accounts, where you have powerful personal testimony met with these aggressive challenges based on inconsistencies, how do you as a listener weigh that?
Yeah, how do you balance the impact of hearing someone's lived experience against this very rigorous, sometimes quite jarring legal process that's designed to test its truthfulness?
It's definitely a lot to consider.
Something to think about as we continue to process all this complex information.